Cyberpunk has had one of the weirdest life cycles of any game I've ever seen. And I think the quote unquote comeback story is largely overstated, but when I say that, I don't mean it in the way you might think I do, and I'll explain. In a lot of ways, this game deserves all the love and all of the hate that gets put on it. This was supposed to be the game that was to end all games, and then and just like that, all the hype and excitement went down the drain. Rightfully so. Cyberpunk was deemed a flop, something CD Projekt Red was completely unfamiliar with. All the hate was well deserved. The game was borderline unplayable at launch on current gen at least, and this could have been avoided. Either take the time necessary to make sure all consoles are in a good state, or make it next gen only and put your focus solely on that. But CDPR was doing their best RuneRite impression, trying to extract as much money as possible to recoup some of the almost $200 million this game cost it to make. I guess Keanu Reeves wasn't a cheap hire. And what makes all this worse is that, contrary to popular belief, this game has always been great at its core. I was extremely lucky to have a PS5 when it dropped, which wasn't perfect, but I didn't have anything game-breaking like current gen. And no, I did not pay the borderline illegal resale prices for the PS5. Funny story actually, me and my two friends were sitting at a PlayStation party, probably talking about shit we would never want to get out, when one of them got a heads up somehow that you can now go pre-order PS5s. Long story short, I waited way too long in line and got it for retail. That story had almost nothing to do with this video's concept, but oh well. Because my experience with the game was a positive one, I always felt like the odd one out, telling anyone who would listen that the game is actually really good. But I fully understood why most people wouldn't give it a first or second chance. But as much as I liked it, I never played it again. That was until about 3 years later where CDPR went on a Y'all Must Have Forgot World tour, dropping their 2.0 update and Phantom Liberty featuring 2018's Sexiest Man Alive, Idris Elba, who apparently has done some acting as well.
Thank y'all for taking on this ride with me. Yeah. You know what? Here go two more for y'all.
Now Night City, and Panam of course, has beckoned me and over 5 million others back to the dark side. And now after 100 hours, if it isn't obvious, I want to talk about it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This video is going to be heavy on the spoiler side of things, so don't say I didn't warn you. Cyberpunk is set in Night City, California in 2077. It's of course super futuristic with people getting closer to resembling machines. And that's made clearer than ever by V, the player character, basically being a Mr. Potato Head. You want an arm that shoots grenades? Sure, here you go. What about some new legs that let you double jump? You got it. How about replacing your belly button with a second dick? That's actually not an option, unfortunately, but if anybody at CDPR is listening, give the people what they want. Anyway, the world is awesome. On the surface, it's a crazy and almost jarring alternative reality that does a really good job at showing all the different cultures and how they interact with the world. The people in Corpo Plaza show a completely different lifestyle than those who live in the rougher neighborhoods, and the nomads separate themselves from both. It makes it feel like a real city that people live in, rather than just a place with a bunch of random NPCs stuffed in there to make it less empty. And that's cool and all, but where it really shines is with the world's dark and honestly really eerie undertones. There's corporations with way more power than they should ever have. There's also an entire criminal underworld with fixers willing to do almost anything for a couple eddies. Cyber psychos, brain dances, I mean, this guy has a goddamn grenade where his nose should be. The whole black market BD thing creeped me the fuck out. They really weren't afraid to go deep on this stuff, and as much as it gave me the heebie-jeebies at times, it does an incredible job painting the picture on this dystopian world they created. Later on in the video, when I talk about side content, I'll talk about a mission that in particular gave me even more of those vibes. Before that though, I want to talk about the main story. The game opens up in one of three ways, depending on which background you chose. And you might be excited thinking that your background means something, and you'd be right. You get a little intro, and if you're lucky, you might even get a dialogue option that lets you use your history to say riveting things like,
Jesus, chill. Wouldn't you want people to think we're werewolves? It's fucking hardcore.
I remember spending a good amount of time thinking about which one I chose because I wrongly assumed that it would mean something. If I had to guess, there was probably more planned for this aspect, but it was probably cut due to time constraints. If only they were able to cut some of those bugs while they were at it. Anyway, not a huge deal, but could have added a ton if they realized its potential. From there, you and your best friend Jackie get a gig to steal some shit. This loser kills his dad, you shove a foreign object in your head, Jackie dies, and so do you. Except you don't, because Keanu Reeves always saves the day.
Silverhand's construct is overriding your consciousness, gradually taking over your body until one day you'll just be gone.
Well, kinda, I guess. Talk about having a bad day. Turns out sticking random things in your body is a bad idea, and now you have a washed up rock star in your head. If you don't do something in a few weeks, V will die and Johnny Silverhand will take over. Only that's not true, and it's just a way for them to create a false sense of urgency. You can spend the next in-game year stopping cyberpsychos, doing gigs, going on the same repetitive date with Panam, and V will still be kicking, with the occasional aneurysm. Usually I can look past pacing issues in games, but Cyberpunk might just be one of the worst, maybe ever. I would wager a guess that anyone who's played this game was left scratching their head, mouth wide open, when they got to the point of no return for the main story. It comes insanely fast, which in itself isn't a huge deal. The problem is the side content outpaces the main story more than 7 times over. And you might say, well, that's fine, just complete the rest after you finish the game. That would be okay with me too. Most open world RPGs do that. Only most RPGs don't start the game by telling you you have less than a month to live, put you in a world that predates the game's ending after you beat it, and then give you 8 months worth of side content, and now DLC. And the side content to me is what takes this game to another level, but the main story and its conflict is actively working against you enjoying it unless you try and completely forget what the game is about. But don't worry, once you forget, they'll remind you with a good old Johnny attack every now and then. It's such a dogshit way of structuring your game and really felt like it could have been avoided. CDPR has struggled with pacing before, mostly in the last act of The Witcher 3, so hopefully this doesn't become a trend because they're one of, if not my favorite game studio at the moment and have big plans for the coming years. But pacing issues and length aside, the main story is a pretty damn good one with some moments that'll definitely stick with me. Tracking down Evelyn through the illegal BDs, which again are creepy as all hell. Then you save her and it's a feel-good moment only for her to unalive herself at the first opportunity because she had been through so much since being kidnapped, which again sets up the world's darker undertones that give it so much depth. On a less fucked up note, getting to relive Johnny's memories at certain points throughout the story is awesome and does a good job shifting the player's perspective on him. At first, it's hard not to look at him as the guy who's killing V and wants to take over, but over time you realize he doesn't want to be there either and eventually starts to help V get his life back, even if it means he would cease to exist. They take this selfish rock star and strip his character down to show that he genuinely does care for V and has empathy for not only him, but anyone else that was affected by Soulkiller. I fucking love Johnny. He isn't just a token celebrity cameo thrown in to drive a little extra hype, like when they put Snoop Dogg as a commentator for Call of Duty for some reason.
Oh shit, the bomb has been planted. Round jam, I'll be ready, man. Yeah. You motherfuckers won good shit, cuz I appreciate the way y'all handled that business.
Wait, holy shit, that was great. When was somebody gonna remind me how cool that was? Anyway, Keanu slid perfectly into this role and really made him one of those video game characters that, to me, are unforgettable. The ending made that feeling even more true. I chose the Panam path. Are there people who actually decide to go with Takamura? Let's keep a long story short since I'm not doing a walkthrough. Saul bites the curb, we kill Adam Smasher, and enter Mikoshi. On a quick side note, I don't know if I'm alone here, but some of the concepts surrounding the cyberspace in this game definitely confuse me at times. There was a few times where I'd be talking to Alt or Johnny about certain shit, and just have to sit and think for a second, then ask myself, what's Mikoshi again? Does DoorDash deliver beyond the Black Wall? It wasn't a big deal, but I did feel a bit lost at times, especially when talking to Alt. But who knows, maybe I was just dropped on my head as a baby. While in Mikoshi, we meet up with Johnny and Alt, who luckily already separated us from Johnny. But if this game has taught me one thing, it's that V is anything but lucky, so even though he can have his body all to himself, and not in that way you freak, he will still die in 6 months. Basically, when Johnny's engram was irresponsibly thrown into V's head, his body saw him as a parasite. That parasite slowly started changing the body's DNA to set up Johnny's eventual takeover. Yeah, the engram's been taken out, but the process has already went too far in the wrong direction, and now when V's construct is placed back into his body, he will now be the parasite. The body is now Johnny's, and there's no DMV in the net that can help him get it put back in his name, so eventually it'll be curtains for him. You can choose to give the body to Johnny permanently, and Alt can absorb you like Kirby, or at least that's how I imagine the process works. I told Panam I'd be back before dinner, so I chose to keep my body in the hopes that we can find a way to fix this. It sucks though, because you have to leave Johnny to that same fate, and he probably could fight and take the body for himself, but he chooses not to.
Goodbye, V. And never stop fighting.
Man, I gotta say, at the beginning, I would have had no idea I would end up feeling so bad for him. He wasn't a saint by any means, but he developed so much over time due to this crazy road him and V are on, and you can't help but love him in the end. He almost reminds me of a significantly less evil version of Negan from The Walking Dead. It's not a one-to-one comparison, but the similarities are definitely there. Now let me zip his pants back up and wrap the last bit of the ending. V and Panam are heading down south to start a new life. It's left pretty open-ended, but seems like they're gonna look for a way to fix V's little issue. All in all, it's a pretty nice conclusion to a journey full of bad luck and bullshit.
Well?
It's perfect. All great, Panam. We're going home.
What the fuck was that? That just made me uncomfortable. The lips not moving made it 10 times weirder, and looking into it, I see I just got the unfortunate pleasure of a signature Cyberpunk bug to close it out. But honestly, even when the scene works as intended, it's still super odd to see V talk in the third person, and I would be perfectly fine if I never saw it again in my life. Now I have no good transition for this, mostly because it's a weird time to talk about it, and I probably should have earlier in the video, but I want to hit quickly on the combat. I don't really remember my initial experience with the combat 3 years ago, mostly because it was forgettable. Now is that because gunplay in games like this always end up feeling stale? Most likely. But man, I gotta say, I had so much fun this time around with my katana build. Between cyberware and the new perks added in the 2.0 update, there are so many different ways to play. Through experimenting, I loved playing fast paced, slowing down time and cutting up an entire group before they could even pull out their weapon. There's just a ton of different ways to play, and it's honestly mind-boggling. Gunplay to me is just hard to enjoy after a while, and hacking has always been good, but has been tuned up a bit as well. Melee combat in its various forms is where they really outdid themselves. I mean, there's sledgehammers, knives, silly string, and more along with various perks and cyberware to add even more variety. It's almost hard to get bored of the combat now because if you want to switch up your playstyle, it costs nothing to take perk points away from one place and throw them into another. Cash isn't too hard to come by either, so you can switch up your cyberware as well to fit whatever build you want. And as great as these changes are, I wouldn't say combat is perfect. Enemy AI is okay at best, even on the hardest difficulty. Basic enemy variety was pretty shallow as well. But I will say there are a good amount of hard and unique fights in the game, with cyber psychos in particular. The missions themselves were not great as they almost always just had you go to a set place and kill or spare them. There's usually some notes to read leading up to and after you deal with them, but after the first couple it ends up feeling like more of the same, with a few standouts here or there. But the same can't be said for the actual fights with them. They're all souped up with various cyberware, which end up making most of them pretty unique in combat, which made it fun. And some were difficult. They were mostly enjoyable, and to me just broke up some of the monotony of fighting the same few enemy types over and over, which is always appreciated. Stealth is mostly average unless you have a hacker build, and it's almost always more fun to just run in, fuck shit up, and leave, to me at least. It might just be more of a preference thing. All in all, I think they did a great job expanding on a combat system that always felt like it had potential with the lack of limitations the world setting puts on it. It's really a credit to how hard CDPR has worked to polish these systems, and it feels like the best version of itself. Let's continue the glazing now by speaking on the side content. If you're able to get past the issues I spoke about earlier in the video, this is where the game to me starts to shift from good to great. I obviously can't speak on every single one, but just know that they are absolutely worth doing, and honestly, you haven't really experienced this game if you haven't. They're not all 10 out of 10s, and some I would say are just flat out bad. Mainly the boxing and racing quests, which are less quests and more just filler that got thrown in because almost all modern RPGs feel the need to shove these in for whatever reason. They're almost never good. I would also put the car delivery missions in that same vein. I mean, if I found that fun, I would apply to USPS. Gigs, on the other hand, are a mixed bag. There's times where I end up saying to myself, man, I'm really glad I did that one. And the other times it ends up being the enrapturing quest structure of go to place, shoot person, take thing, bring to me for monies. And I have to say, as boring as those can be, when you get one of the good ones, it feels rewarding, so all in all, I can't hate on the gigs too much, because even at its worst, it's at least an excuse to spend more time in Night City, which I appreciate. Now that I got the more minor stuff out of the way, I can talk about maybe my favorite part of this game. The storylines are all incredible with no weak spots whatsoever. Again, can't speak on all of them, but man, I absolutely could. They nailed it with Judy and Panam's story, and they can have effects on the main game's ending, which makes them even better. River and the Paralyses start off simple, but develop into some of the most unique and eerie storytelling that I've seen from a game. The Paralysis story in particular was perfectly executed in ways that most games wouldn't dare to do. You meet them initially through a quest that has you investigating the death of a previous mayor. This is of particular interest to Jefferson as he's a potential candidate to take over that job. Fast forward, you bring all the info to the couple, and some time later they'll contact you with a different issue. They want you to roleplay as a detective one more time and look into a break-in. Following a blood trail leads to a hidden room in their own house that some organization has been using to spy on the couple. Only that's not even close to the worst of it. After chasing down a vehicle that's connected to this group, you find a shard on one of the agents, and that gives you some information on something called Project Condon. You learn that these people are in some way manipulating the brains of the Paralyses and others, slowly changing their personality and behaviors. The concept itself is bad enough, but having control from the shadows of a potential mayor is scary shit. You end up meeting with Elizabeth, which ends up being such an uneasy conversation. She's noticed her husband slowly changing and can tell that she is as well. And you'd think that she'd want V to get to the bottom of it and stop it, but the trail's gone cold and it seems like there might be nothing you can do at the moment. She tells you not to tell Jefferson anything about this because she knows he'll do something rash that could get him and her killed. At the same time, submitting to the fact that they're being mind controlled might be a scarier concept than the alternative. On your way to meeting Jefferson,
Yeah?
It doesn't matter what you tell him. It doesn't matter what you think of doing or do. You can't change anything.
What?
We know who you are. We know what you are. We know what you want. You are playing with fire. Don't dare cross the line.
I'm not gonna lie, my testicles were in my stomach listening to this. What the fuck, man? That phone call perfectly served its intended purpose. You think you're about to go tell Perales everything? Think of fucking again. I immediately said to myself afterwards that it'd be sending him on a suicide mission to tell him what's going on. Whoever or whatever is behind this is clearly capable considering they're able to hack into V's optics and phone with ease. I tucked my tail and told Jefferson nothing, and then nothing. I thought for sure there would be more to this story, and I was so excited to see what was going to happen, but after waiting like an in-game week, I assumed my game was bugged or something, or I chose the wrong option. After looking into it and being disappointed at first, there's actually nothing that comes after this. Then I realized that's exactly what CDPR wanted. Instead of finishing this in the stereotypical way where the good guy beats the bad guy no matter the odds, they told it 1,000 times better by saying nothing. You're supposed to feel hopeless and completely on edge. This entity is clearly not to be fucked with, and even V, who knows he's capable of beating the odds, knows this is a losing battle. This questline was damn near perfect, and I really hope that in some way, shape, or form, we can get more information one day on whoever that was. Now to cleanse your palate, here's another more lighthearted side mission. This is Brendan, a sentient vending machine who can give you soda and apparently lay some pipe judging by this woman's obsession with him.
Brandon, you are the sweetest person I know. I'll see you later.
Well, you can talk to him and he'll become a friend. Eventually, you can help him get the courage to ask this girl out, and I'm lying, he ends up getting taken away and reprogrammed.
Fuck! Oh.
Dude, does anybody in the city ever win? Even a cute-ass talking soda machine can't catch a goddamn break. Living in this world seems like a miserable existence. I mean, take this guy as another example. My man went into a restaurant to order an extra large egg roll and got a fried shrimp instead. Is nothing sacred anymore? On that note, let's put a bow on this section. Side questing in this game is just incredible, and there's a ton of great stories that I didn't even mention. They did an amazing job utilizing them to flesh out this world, allowing you to see its depth, and it just breathes so much life into it. CDPR definitely knows how to do side quests, but one thing they do better than anyone in the industry is DLC, and Phantom Liberty is no exception. If you've played The Witcher 3 and its major DLCs, you know exactly what time it is when them boys from Poland decide to create an expansion. Now I'm going to issue another spoiler warning for anyone who hasn't played Phantom Liberty yet. I will be spoiling it. This is your warning. Brevity definitely isn't one of my strong suits, but I'll try to keep this as short as I can and give my opinions on it because I have plenty of those. Now, before we start, this is your reminder to again try your best and forget that V is supposed to have died about 16 times over now. Luckily for us, this DLC uses V's condition as a plot point, which I personally love. It just makes sense, you know? Anyway, this is Songbird. She's a netrunner who introduces herself by giving V a seizure. She proceeds to give Johnny the boot for the problem that she started and then puts another problem on my plate, which is a nice touch. Apparently the president of the NUSA, Rosalind Myers, is on a plane that's been hacked and is going to crash over Dogtown any minute now. Oh yeah, Dogtown is the new area they added with the DLC, and I gotta say, it was a seamless and really nice touch to Night City. She wants us to make sure that we get to the crash site before the gremlins of Dogtown do and save the president. In return, she makes a deal that she'll cure V's condition, which I do not believe. Anyways, this seems a little urgent, so...
Life like this sure is sweet, huh? It definitely is.
I guess I should probably go save that lady now.
Not one move!
Getting her out of this area was actually way tougher than I thought. It really felt like the enemy AI worked together to take me out, and it got me a few times. I think the melee approach here was just a losing battle. Anyway, we jump through a few more hoops, kill whatever the fuck this thing is, and end up in the Dogtown equivalent to the Marriott. In the process, Songbird went dark, which is where Beefy Idris Elba comes in, aka Solomon Reed. He's a former special agent with ties to Miss Bird and has a complicated history with Myers as well. He's able to get her dumbass to safety, and now we can focus on Songbird. We meet with an old friend of Reed's and devise a plan to meet with another netrunner named Slatter. We learn that she's been going beyond the Black Wall to communicate with us, which Slatter describes very eloquently.
Everybody fucked in the ass.
He's able to get us through to her shortly, and she tells us that she got taken by Kurt Hansen, the corrupt mayor of Dogtown. She tells us to crash a party that he's throwing where we can meet her. Slatter then gets
fucked in the ass,
unfortunately, and I almost feel bad for the guy. Anyway, now I have to do a bit of rapid fire because I'm finding myself inching closer to walkthrough territory trying to set this up. I just can't help myself. So we meet Songbird at the party in the flesh, and she reestablishes our connection and tells us that Hansen has the cure for both of us. We meet some red-headed twins who will be using military tech to impersonate later on. They're set to meet with Hansen, so we need to take their place and help Songbird get what she needs and then bounce. Before that, we get to one of my favorite conversations in the entire game with Songbird. To this point, she hasn't been honest with you at all. She set up the attack on Myers as a deal with Hansen to cure her condition. Things went left, and now he's using her as collateral to cover his own ass should the NUS come after him. We also learn a lot about her backstory and how she was forced into this life as a teenager, only to be used for her talent. The NUS and Myers have her doing their dirty work, going beyond the Black Wall, and she's taken all the risk with no reward. She's a victim in all this, and you feel terrible for her. But it's also in this conversation where you can tell she's willing to cross anyone, telling half-truths to finally get the resolution she's so desperate for. Even V, who's going through a lot of the same. She's an incredibly written character, and I'll have to go a bit more in depth after the DLC because it gets even more deep then. Now it's time for the heist on Hansen. We track down the twins, these dickheads kill them even though they weren't a threat, and we assume our new identities. Meeting with Hansen has us having to answer certain questions correctly to keep our cover up, which is a pretty fun concept, but feels forced into this conversation. We can now choose to side with Reed to stop Songbird or stick with her. Reed honestly annoys me, so Hansen goes night-night, Stadium goes boom-boom, and we skedaddle with Songbird. Now the NUS is on her tail, so where's the best place to hide? Obviously, it's the moon, so that's where she's headed to cure herself and make the prototype for V. She's also not looking too good and is most likely on death's door. We make our way to the spaceport, and waiting at the top is Myers and Reed, like two peas in each other's mouth. We sneak past them and make our way to the shuttle. And I gotta say, this whole fight sequence was sick. It's cool enough by itself, but with Songbird looking like she's already dead, it makes it that much more intense. We somehow survive and head to the train that'll take us to the shuttle. We have a little chat with our favorite netrunner, and I'll let her take it from here.
Neural Matrix V can only be used once.
Man, I can't say I'm surprised, but
Fuck me.
it was one of those things that always seemed kinda obvious, but you wanted to help her regardless. Let me just wrap this up since it's basically done, and then I'll talk about how I feel about Songbird and this DLC as a whole. I decided to see it through to the end because even though she fucked us over, could V really say he wouldn't have done the same in her position? Besides, it'd be petty to let this go to waste and have neither of us be saved. We carry her all the way to the shuttle, and standing in the way is this walking steroid. He gives us one last opportunity to hand her over, or else... I feel like they wanted you to think long and hard about this, but Reed isn't likable to me at all. Yeah, I feel bad for the shit he's been through, but this dude's still on Myers' leash, who is just a bad person. Reed gets popped every time for me. And with that, we send Songbird to the moon. I've tried to look at this DLC with a critical eye and can only come away with one thing. Phantom Liberty is fucking awesome. Now, can I poke some holes in some minor problems? Sure, I didn't love Reed as a character if I'm being honest. Hanson on the other hand I really like and almost feel like he was underutilized. We also don't get enough Myers, and a quest where you could potentially confront her for all her BS would have been great. But all of these are minor issues like I said, and I can look past them for the best parts of this expansion. In my opinion, Songbird is one of the best characters in the entire game, behind Johnny of course. Even when she betrays you, usually if it was someone else you would be mad, but even though you're the one who's getting screwed in this situation, you still feel bad for her. I was left wanting more and was hoping I can get more updates from her after the fact. They did such a good job fleshing her out in the short amount of time that they had. I really hope she gets brought back in some way in the sequel. And in all my yapping, I didn't even talk about the side stuff added with Phantom Liberty. I won't go into details, but the random jobs are almost all worth doing, and some are really good. Mr. Hands is a great character that gets some more shine with this DLC and easily becomes the best fixer in the game with some fun gigs. I can almost guarantee he'll play a role in the next game, and he absolutely should. I originally planned to do a section of this video talking about the various characters in the game and how I feel about them, but this video is already way longer than I intended it to be. Turns out I really like this game and couldn't stop myself from giving unnecessary details and unsolicited opinions. I talked a good amount about my feelings on Johnny, Songbird, and some others, so what I'll do instead is a tier list ranking all the relevant characters, and they'll be in order from left to right. This is the correct list, and if you think otherwise, you're wrong. If you feel strongly about a character being too low or too high, yell at me in the comments. Me and the board of character rankings will mull over your responses and see what we can do. Thank you. Oh wait, there's actually one more minor character that I wanted to talk about quick. V. I have mixed feelings on the male V. I mostly like his inclusion. There's times where I'm glad he's fully voiced because it adds to the scenario, but there are some others where I wish he wasn't so goddamn corny.
Rust and piss, shitbot! And the maze balls.
All in all, I can't complain, and there were definitely more positives going in this direction. Now before I wrap this up, let's look ahead. CD Projekt Red have already confirmed that they're in the concept phase of a sequel to Cyberpunk, and I'm a raging nerd, so I love thinking about what I would want from the next game. The world and its lore set an amazing foundation. Let me talk about what I don't want to see first. Scrap the fistfights and the races unless you're willing to flesh them out properly. As much as I like V's story, the next game should move forward and away from them. Maybe add mention of them, or do one better, potentially have a whole quest related to them in some way. The biggest thing is don't fuck up the pacing the same way and make the story longer as a result. Obviously I can nitpick other more minor stuff, but that's what jumps out for me. And yes, I want the game to be playable at launch, that should be a given, so I didn't feel the need to include it. Now for the things I want to see added or expanded on. Make the open world even more worth exploring. Give us more random events, Easter eggs, and unmarked quests. Reward players for wanting to see every part of your game. I also want to see some sort of faction system added. Give these groups like the Moxes, the Animals, and the Nomads dedicated questlines with interesting characters that make you understand them more. Speaking of Nomads, make them more prevalent in the outskirts of the city. When I step into the Badlands, there should be a feel that the Nomads run that shit, and different groups own certain territories. Maybe if I go to one area, they might try to shake me down and intimidate me into paying them to be there, while others are friendly and are only out there to get away from the chaos of the city. Last but not least, my number one wish for any RPG that comes out from now until forever is Baldur's Gate 3 level freedom of choice. Nothing, and I mean nothing, can add more fun and replayability than being able to do whatever the fuck you want. If I want to tell Panam to kick rocks and lock myself out of everything she and the Aldecaldos have to offer, I should be able to do that 100%. I would personally never do it, but I want that option. If after the Perales investigation, I feel that it's just better for me to smoke Jefferson because he's a potential danger to the city, let me. Just allow me to do whatever I want and let me face the consequences of my own actions. It's never been easier to just reload a save to make up for messing up. I fully respect that it's harder to tell a good story in those confines, so maybe put some limitations on it. But adding this freedom in some way, shape, or form can only improve your game if done right. Use the comment section like a Reddit thread so I can read through everyone's different ideas for the next game or even potential theories on what it might be about. Watching to this point in the video, I already know you're a 500 IQ GigaChad or Chadette, so your opinions are more than valid. Now, how do I feel about Cyberpunk in 2024? At its best, it rivals any other game in the genre, and I mean that. But there are some fundamental issues that hold the game back from reaching its near limitless potential. I've said it like 10 times in this video and I'll say it once more. The main conflict of the story is a dark cloud that hangs over your head to the point where you have to actively try to forget about it, only for the game to remind you again. This whole ticking time bomb trope that modern open world RPGs keep doing is silly. Almost every time they write themselves into a corner and they put that burden on the player. Either forget about the reason that you're here in the first place, or it'll annoy you the entire game. To add insult to injury, the main story I think is pretty damn good. There are weak points, in particular the stuff with Takamura isn't terrible, but felt a bit stale for me. But when it's good, it's great. The big issue is, it's too short, once again because V's issue is so urgent. It makes sense, but if the writing shifted a bit to make the timeline to death more vague, you give yourself way more room to work with. I'm not asking them to bloat the main story with fetch quests and information dumps, but I feel like even the writers probably felt like there was stuff left on the cutting room floor. By the time you really start getting invested in the story, you hit a brick wall. Now you have about 60 plus hours worth of content to do while completely halting the main story. Most people probably need a refresher what the game's about by the time you finally are ready to meet Hanako at Embers. But even with all that being said, I think this video up to this point shows how I feel about this game as a whole. The main story is really good, like I said, even with its flaws. A ton of the side stuff is a labor of love that fleshed this world out better than anything else could have done. The storylines being the best example in showing what the game can do when it's at its apex. And the characters to me are just flat out amazing, Johnny being one of my favorites in recent memory, to the point that when I saw he had a Funko Pop, I bought it ASAP. Then you top all that off with the DLC that was so good it brought everyone back to Night City. CDPR failed at launch, undoubtedly, but since then they've kept chipping away at all the bad to polish this game to what we have today. At its core, this is what I knew the game could be all the way back in 2020. Even with me spoiling a ton, it's still absolutely worth playing if you never have. For all its flaws, I love this game and I can't wait to see what they do with the sequel. Expand on all those great things and learn from the mistakes. If they can execute on that, I can genuinely see this being one of the best RPG series out there. That's the level of potential this world has. Now that you know I like this game, did you like this video? If so, please consider liking and subscribing, as I plan on putting out more just like it on other games. I honestly had a lot of fun making this and already have my next video planned out. If you're interested in that and plan to watch it, awesome, but even if that's not the case, I appreciate you all the same for watching this one. Have a good life, everyone.